In this session, we are going to see what are different barriers of communication. In the process of communication, we have seen there is a sender who is going to give the message to the receiver using channel or medium, and then receiver is going to decode that message and giving some kind of response feedback to the sender. At that time, we are calling it that communication process is complete. Communication is complete and perfect when the receiver understands the message in the same sense and spirit as the communicator intends to convey. Practically, it has been noticed that such perfect and complete communication does not take place because of certain obstacles or other factors known as communication barriers. These barriers makes the communication incomplete and ineffective. So, let's see what are the barriers of communication. First one is personal barriers. Personal barriers may result from the receiver's physical state as ill health, poor eyesight, or hearing difficulties, pain, etc. For example, a receiver with reduced hearing may not grasp the entirety of a spoken conversation, especially if there is significant background noise. So, personal barriers is depending on the capacity of person. Next one is semantic barriers. Semantic barriers are concerned with problems and abstractions in the process of encoding and decoding the message into words or other impressions. The use of different languages, different interpretations of words and symbols, poor vocabulary, and poor grammatical knowledge are some of semantic barriers. Semantic barriers is also called as language barrier. The meanings of words are not in the words, they are in us. Words and symbols used have several meanings depending upon the context in which they are used. Poor vocabulary affects the communicator to convey written or verbal message in the right sense. The communicator should know the clear and precise meaning of the word used and their appropriate replacement. If the inappropriate and inadequate words are used, they will not make clear the idea to communicate. So these are few semantic barriers. Even when the communicating in the same language, the terminology used in a message may act as a barrier if it is not fully understood by the receivers. So, language and linguistic ability may act as a barrier to communication. Next barrier is physical barrier. There are different kinds of physical barriers. Physical barriers to communication is geographical distance between the sender and receiver. Communication is generally easier over shorter distance as more communication channels are available and less technology is required. Although modern technology often serves to reduce the impact of physical barriers. The advantages and disadvantages of each communication channel should be there, but what is appropriate channel can be used for the listener and speaker have to decide to overcome the physical barriers. There are some physical barriers as noise, improper time, distance, overloaded information. Noise. Any disturbance that reduces the clarity and effectiveness of communication is called noise. It may be physical or psychological, written or visual. Noise distracts the person communicating and acts as barrier to communication. Loud noise of speaker playing outside or noise due to machines affects listening process of persons communicating. Mental trouble affect the receiver's listening and understanding the message. Similarly, inattentiveness and indifference of the listener make communication ineffective. Improper timing of communication also affects the process of communication. Message requiring action in distant future may be forgotten A phone call at midnight interrupting sleep further irritates the receiver if message is not urgent. The distance between sender and receiver acts as a barrier in communication process as sender has to speak loudly to convey the message. Similarly, in the transaction of the message may be hampered due to the distance of miles. So these are few physical barriers. Next one is organizational barriers. Organizational rules and regulations prescribing the different subject matter along formal communication may restrict the flow of messages and act as obstacles in the communication process. Sometimes it happens that important messages are omitted or manipulated. Observance of rigid rules and regulations related to communication causes delay of message and discouragement to employ in conveying their creative and innovative ideas. On the other hand, where such rules and regulations are free, flexible communications is effective. Employees feel encouraged and motivated to come up with new ideas and opinions. To overcome the above non-conducting meeting that barriers, certain organizations conduct staff meetings to know the grievances and suggestions of employees. In organizations where such meetings and conferences are missing, free flow of communication is interrupted and the communication gap between persons is ruled. There is also wrong choice of channel. There is many mediums and channels of communication available like face-to-face, oral communication, telephonic, email, and audio-visual. Each channel is not ideal and perfect in every situation. Written communication is required in case of formal relations, but in communicating with illiterate people, this channel fails. Illiterate people are to be communicated orally and with support of pictures. So that is organizational barriers. Next one is psychological barriers. Psychological barriers arise from motives, emotions, social values, different perceptions, etc. This creates a psychological distance, causes misunderstanding among people, and affect the communication process. Sometimes people are doing premature evaluation. It is human tendency that we try to evaluate quickly. We do not listen or read the whole, but try to infer from certain part of message. The moment we try to evaluate, we stop for the message visible to our sensory receptors. As a result, effective communication does not take place because of premature evaluation. Egotism is also one of the psychological barrier. Egotism is diametrically opposite to transmission of understanding, the most vital aspects of communication. The self-centered persons think that their own ideas are more important and others are wrong. Such people are very bad listeners. They keep their mind closed and alienate from people with whom they work. If a person wants other people to understand him, he has to be understand them. Even emotions are important in communication. Positive emotions such as love, affection, and compassion smoothen the flow of communication, whereas negative emotions such as hatred, anger, anxiety obstruct the communication process. Excited, nervous, afraid individuals cannot think rationally and transmit their negativity to others. They cannot receive the message as it is. So these are few barriers in communication process.